Hey, good morning. Today's another one of our first fives. So, there's a characteristic of Jesus in his teaching that I really wish I could do as well as he could do. I mean, I know I'm not Jesus, and I'm not trying to say I am. But one of the things Jesus did so well is he told stories. He was an incredible storyteller. In fact, what Jesus did most often in his teaching is he would ask questions and he would tell stories. And sometimes his stories led to you and I asking questions, right? That's what often happened. And so there's a story in Matthew chapter 13, beginning with verse 31. Here's what happens. He told them another parable, talking about Jesus. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So it's fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. It's not that he was trying to hide things from people. It's just he was telling them stories because sometimes when we're super blunt with people, in the moment, they can't hear what we actually had to say. Have you noticed that? When you're really blunt, sometimes if you're right, now sometimes people are really blunt, and frankly, they're just wrong. But Jesus wasn't. And so what he's saying here is this. The kingdom of heaven is like. He's trying to paint a picture. He's using words, using stories. He's trying to paint this picture because frankly, we can't grasp the beauty and the depth and the awe-inspiring aspects of the kingdom of God, because it really does go against the grain in which we so often live. So what we find is this: the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, right? Mustard seeds, small seeds, but they grow into big plants. That's the point, right? The next is the kingdom of heaven is like yeast. Now, I've never used yeast, but I know if you don't put it in bread, the bread will not rise. So a little bit of yeast, just a little bit, will cause the bread to rise. A lot of yeast will make it huge, right? But it's kind of that way with our faith. It's amazing how our faith starts small, or just a small group of people. In fact, I remember reading years ago, Timothy Keller said that in Manhattan, where he planted a church in the late 80s, he said their goal was, Manhattan at the time was less than 1% Christian, or said they were less than 1% Christian. And his goal was 3%. And you're like, 3%? Like, that sounds really small. He's like, it is small, but the goal is this. If 3% of the people here become devoted followers of Jesus, it's the yeast. And frankly, that's actually happened in Manhattan. Redeemer Church grew, and so did some other churches, and so some pretty cool things have happened in New York City because of this kind of dream that this yeast might happen, this little bit. See, this is the way God works in the world. We sometimes don't notice. See, we sometimes look for God in these huge, big productions, these massive places, and where we find them is in the little everyday spots of our lives. And it's amazing how, when you look back over your life, how the little things have the greatest impact. I remember not long before we moved from Illinois to Michigan. It's been several years ago now, but before we moved, I got a text from a friend of mine and his wife both, and they just said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for your friendship." And the reality is, what she said was, my husband's a better man when he's around you. Seriously, one of the most humbling texts I've ever gotten. He shared with me how his faith grew exponentially with our friendship, and how he found himself back in church and he hadn't been there in years. And those two incidents, those text messages, honestly, I didn't do anything but just have a friend. He liked to play golf and we liked sports, so we just talked about that stuff and played golf together. But it's amazing how those little things over time sometimes develop, and we think, like I think, that was no big deal, I was just me. But the influence of me or of you on someone else, if we live again and again with the reflection of God's love, if we're yeast, if we're mustard seeds with our faith, then we'll recognize the kingdom of heaven is like these little acts of kindness, this way of living that is gracious and humble and generous. And in the middle of all those things, it just expands. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the next thing you know, you got this huge sunflower tree. The next thing you know, you got this huge loaf of bread. So out of something small, something great can happen. And so may you and I live today, may we take every little opportunity, recognizing that we never know when God may use those little things to do great things. So let's not look for God just in the grandiose, but let's look for God in the little everyday things. And may you and I live in such a way that the kingdom of heaven is like the little aspects of our life. May your day be filled with God's grace and His peace and His love. We'll see you next time.